was talking this morning with your minister, with Carl, and we were talking about the fact that, in our churches today, it's getting harder and harder to find ministers. I have phone calls every week from churches. Some of them are small and some are large, and it's like, where in the world are we going to find more people to fill the pulpits? And so I want you to understand, I'm here today, number one, to talk about the mission of the church, and number two, to realize that without young men and young women going to our Bible colleges, we're not going to have men and women going around the world. When I served in Mexico City for 20 years with Niños de Mexico, I raised my 4 kids there. I sent them off to Bible college. All 4 of them graduated, and all of them are in various ministries today. And I've got to tell you, the mission of Christ starts here and it goes there, but we have to get there or we're never going to get the mission finished. And so this morning, I'd like for you to turn in your Bibles to Acts the 1st chapter and the 8th verse. And that's all we're going to look at today, one small verse. In my office, I have all kinds of books on leadership training and church growth, strategic planning, and a lot of times we get all hung up about missions. And we've got this mission and that mission, and one to older people and one to younger people, and we've got missions upon missions upon missions, and the church has forgotten its mission. And so this morning, I want us just to get rid of all that stuff and just go to this section of Scripture and find out what is the mission of St. Louis Christian College, of your congregation, of each of us as individuals, because there is only one mission. It's not a multiple mission. Acts 1:8. Let me give you a little bit of a background. I teach the book of Acts at St. Louis Christian College. I love teaching the book. I have students in my class who sometimes they do really well at exams and sometimes they don't. I have some who do really well at written reports and some of them don't. And so I have what's called participation participation numbers that I will add to their grade if they will listen, if they'll ask questions, if they'll answer questions. And when I'm going through today, I'll stop a couple of places and I'll say, now here is a question for you, and I want you to answer those questions just like my students would. And that way you'll get extra credit, and if you ever come to St. Louis Christian College, I'll put you in the advanced class because you already know all the answers, at least to one verse of the Bible. Acts 1:8. Jesus has been preaching after his resurrection. He's been teaching his followers. He's been instructing them on what to do. He's taken them outside the city. He has them on the mount, and now he's ready to leave. And they're still not listening real well, sort of like my freshmen in my class. They think they're listening, but they're not really. And Jesus says, it's time for me to go. And you've got Peter and Andrew and James and John, and they're all talking. In fact, if you read the ends of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John in the very first part of the book of Acts, you'll find some of them questioning Jesus. Jesus, can I sit on your right hand? Can I sit on your left? Jesus, are you coming back tonight? Are you coming back tomorrow? Jesus, are you going to be sitting on a throne over Rome or over Jerusalem? And Jesus says, guys, would you just be quiet for a moment and listen? These are the final words of Jesus our Lord to us as individuals, to the church corporately. And he says this, you will be my witnesses, beginning in Jerusalem, going to Judea and Samaria and the ends of the earth. That was it, and he was gone. Just a couple of small sections in one small verse in one book of the Bible sums up the mission of the church. And so this morning, let's look at it. Jesus says, I do want you to go into Jerusalem. I want you to wait for my Spirit to come, and then you will be. Now, when I'm talking to my students, I encourage them to understand the Holy Spirit is behind everything that we do in our our life. I don't care if you're a plumber or a mechanic or a farmer, if you're retired, if you're a preacher, a teacher, whatever it is that you do with your occupation or vocation, everything is led by the Spirit of God if you are a follower of God. And so we're going to take that as a given. Maybe I'll come back sometime and we'll talk about the Spirit of God. But he says, you will go into Jerusalem, you will wait for my Spirit to come, and then you will be. As first question that I ask my students in my Acts class, what part of speech is will be? Do I have any English teachers here? I saw somebody sort of raise their hand and sort of put it back down real fast. I always like to tempt English teachers. And occasionally I find one that actually knows the correct answer will be. My students, the ones who really need the extra credit, they raise their hand and go, oh, I've got the answer to this one. It's future tense. And I'll go, yeah, that makes sense. Jesus is saying sometime in the nebulous future, you are going to be my witness. And again, most of them are freshmen, and you can tell freshmen, the light bulb's not all the way screwed in tight. It's just sort of flickering. And you can see them going, that doesn't sound right. And then I tell them, it is the imperative. And then their eyes go totally blank. Just like some of you. The imperative, what in the world is that? Jesus was using the imperative the same way my dad used to do. My dad would say, Terry, you will take out the trash. Well, that meant sometime in the nebulous future. Whenever I got around to it. It could be today, it could be tomorrow, it could be next week. No. The imperative was a command. My dad said, you will take out the trash. And I said, yes, sir, and I took it out. Because that was what he was telling me. This is a command. You will do what I tell you. Jesus was talking to Peter, Andrew, James, and John. He said, guys, listen to me. You have no choice but to do what I tell you to do. This is my command. You will be my witness. Now, I don't know about you. I don't like to be told what to do. I really don't. I'm a red-blooded American male. All of you red-blooded American women understand us, guys. Yeah, we don't like to be told, but you know how to tell us, and we will do what you tell us. Jesus was saying, you will do what I tell you to do. And I don't like it, but Jesus said, get over it. If you are my follower, if you are a Christian, you will do what I tell you. And here's what I'm telling you to do. You will be my witness. Second question. What is a witness? There's where my freshmen really get excited. And they start raising their hands all over. And invariably it's a guy, I don't know why, but he'll say it's someone who sits in front of a judge, puts their hand on the Bible, swears to tell the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth, so help them God. And I go, congratulations. You watched Judge Judy. But you're wrong. That's not what the word means. A couple of chapters from now, we find a young man who is standing in front of the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin is the same group who put Jesus to death. They were the ones who condemned him and handed him over to Rome, and Rome did the actual nailing, but they're the ones who said, crucify him. And this young man is standing in front of the Sanhedrin, and he is talking about Jesus of Nazareth. And he is challenging them. He's saying, your people, the leadership, have been stiff-necked. You have uncircumcised lips and hearts. And they said, enough of this. They took him outside the city. They threw him down and threw rocks on his head. And we call him Stephen, the first Christian martyr. Witness. Oh, martyr. Same word. The exact same word that's used in both places. It's martus in Greek. And what it literally means is, you will die for him. And Jesus in his command says, if you are my follower, you have no choice but to die for me. whether it's with your last breath or it's the end of the spirit. My dad died in July this year. Mom died in May. They were only apart about 10 weeks. My dad was an elder in a church from the time I was young. And my dad was one who always said, I will burn out before I rust out. And when he was in his young 80s, there was a lady in the church who, she had a garage door. It was one of those old, heavy wooden ones. You know, it pivoted in the middle, and she would have to lift it up and then get her car out. And in the wintertime, there was too much snow, and she couldn't get to church. And my dad talked to the young men in the church, those young guys in their 60s, and he said, guys, it was a small church, okay? So they didn't have anyone younger than their 60s, but they were young. He said, we need to put up a new garage door. And they said, well, we don't know how. He said, well, I do. He called Lowe's. He had it delivered. He stood there and helped them nail the pieces in and put the springs in. And they handed the little beeper to the little lady. And she hit that beeper for the first time, and the door went up, and it didn't matter if it was raining or snowing or what. She was able to get to her doctor's appointment. She was able to get to the church. They understood that we have no choice but to be about our Father's business until we die. I was at a funeral yesterday of an elder at a church that I used to preach at in Missouri. Wayne had been in submarine Navy during the Korean War. And they said that for the last month or so, Wayne wasn't thinking right. He had a stroke a little over a week ago, actually. Last Sunday, they thought he was doing okay, and Monday he died. But during his confusion, whether it was the drugs or something else, all the way through, he kept talking to the nurses and doctors about Jesus. Now, he wasn't making sense about a lot of other things, but he was making sense to them that you need to have the right relationship with Jesus Christ. And you need to be one of his sons or daughters. And that was through his confusion until he died. He was a witness. And that's what Jesus is telling us. If we are his followers, the mission is this: you will be my witness. And then he was very strategic. He said, here is where you will be my witness. You will be my witness beginning in Jerusalem. And I liken that to family. You know, the people who are the most like us, they are a part of our blood, they're a part of our race, they're a part of our life. Why do you think Jesus put family first? Because it's the hardest. You know, sometimes it's harder to be a witness to our families than it is to pygmies in Africa. To an unbelieving father or mother or grandma or grandpa or uncle or aunt or brother or sister or spouse. They know the good, the bad, and the ugly. They know what you're really like. They know that you're not perfect. And they're going, well, why should I be a Christian if you act the way you do? You understand where I'm at, right? Jesus understood where we would be. Jesus had brothers and sisters. In the first part of the book of Acts, it actually talks about some of the brothers and sisters who were in the upper room after Jesus left. They were half-brothers and sisters. But it says in Scripture, they did not believe until after Jesus was in ministry. You know, can you imagine your kid brother or sister? Well, it'd have to be brother if it was Jesus, coming up to you and saying, I'm the Son of God. Now, I don't think Jesus actually did it that way. But for them, they knew that when he was working with his father, who was a carpenter, if he hit himself with a hammer, what did he do? Well, he cried, he yelled, he screamed. we have no choice but to first go to our family and witness to them. Now, we're not commanded to convert them. That's up to them. But we are commanded to present Jesus logically to our family so that they can be in heaven with us. Then he continues, he says, you will be my witness not only in Jerusalem, but in Judea. And Judea would be the people who are like us. Not just the ones that we like, that are family, but the ones like us. They speak our language. They are our culture. There is no problem getting to them. That's the people around us in Lancaster and in other areas close to here. There are people, I guarantee you this morning, there's at least one person in Lancaster not in church. That's a sure thing. There's probably more than 1, 2, or 3, or 10, or 12. And in this whole community and in this county, there are people who are going to hell because we have not been a witness to them. Jesus says, after you're done witnessing to your family, you better witness to the people around you. A couple of years ago when I was in Boise, Idaho, I had a guest speaker. And the guest speaker, I took him out to eat at a steakhouse. And as we were at the steakhouse, it was one that, is sort of noisy. It's called the Texas Roadhouse. And good meat, but really noisy. And we are sitting at the table, and the waitress came up to us, and my guest, I had never heard of this before. I never even thought of this before. My guest said to the waitress, do you have any prayer requests? We're going to be praying for the food that you're going to be bringing us in just a little bit. And while we're doing that, if you have a prayer request, we'd be glad to pray for you. She looked at him like, you're the craziest guy in the world. She said, no. And she put the drinks down. She took the order. She left. When she came back with the food, the salads, she looked at him and said, are you serious? And he said, yes. She said, and then she just broke down. Tears started. She said, would you pray for my mom? Now, we were in Boise, Idaho. Her mom was in Las Vegas. And that morning, she was undergoing, or that afternoon, she was undergoing a mastectomy. And they weren't sure that she would live. They weren't sure how extensive the cancer was. She couldn't be there with her mom. And she's just crying. She said, would you pray for Mom? And would you pray for those doctors? And so as she handed out the salads, he just bowed his head and prayed for her. I've got to tell you, I was shamed. I was the president of a college. I had been in ministry for 20-some years. I had never prayed with a waitress or a waiter in my life. I had never asked them if they had a prayer request because I thought they would look at me like I was an idiot. Being an idiot for Jesus is not a bad thing.
Amen.
And so I would encourage you, I don't care if it's at a school, I don't care where it is, I don't care if it's not politically correct. Jesus said, get over it. You will be my witness to the community around you. And then he says, and this is really hard, he says, you will be my witness to Samaria. Now, to us, what's Samaria? Well, that's the next place down the road. No, if you were a good Jew, you were taught from the time that you were little, and understand, all the apostles were good Jews. They had been taught from the time they were little that if you're going down the street and there's a Samaritan on the other side, you spit into the dust to show your disgust. They were half-breed Jews. Oh, their background had been Jewish, but they had given it up. They thought that you didn't have to worship in Jerusalem. You could worship in Samaria. They had their own temple. They did bad things against the Jews in Jerusalem, and so the Jews in Jerusalem did bad things against them. In fact, the Jews in Jerusalem, instead of going to Galilee through Samaria, they would go to the other side of the Jordan River and up, just so they didn't have to go through Samaria and get dirty. Let me ask you a question. Are you prejudiced? I am. Sometimes. I don't mean to be, but sometimes I am. When we moved to St. Louis, now I grew up west of St. Louis. I know St. Louis really, really well. I'd just been gone 30 years. We decided we wanted to live as close to the college as we could. Now, some of you know what happened there about 4.5 years ago, the Ferguson riots. Well, that was across the interstate from the college. At that time, the college was 350 students. When I moved there last year, it was 81. It's because nobody wanted to go to the black neighborhoods. They didn't want to go to a place where their kids would be burned, raped, or shot. And I heard that. That never happened anywhere close to the college. But there's a lot of racism that's going on. But that's not what Jesus was talking about, racism. He was talking about downright prejudice. My father-in-law was a farmer in southwest Missouri. He had a little farm, about 1,200 acres, and he raised some cattle. And I found out that farmers really are prejudiced. He was a red tractor guy. Yeah, some of you know the green tractor guys. In this area, the green tractors outweigh the red tractors. But, you know, it's sort of fun to listen to them talk. But it's not all talk. Sometimes, if you drive a red tractor, the green tractor guys don't like you. And if you're a green tractor guy, you don't like the red tractor. Or, my father-in-law, he had a white face. I'll tell you what, those Herefords were beautiful cows. He liked them. Why, there wasn't anybody who raised those Angus cows that was worth anything. Because his Herefords were much better than the Angus or the Charolais, or some of you are going, yeah, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Now, it's sort of fun and games, but it's really not. Sometimes we are prejudiced against people who are just plain different than we are. They have a different education. You know, if they only have a 6th grade education, they're ignorant. Or if they've got a PhD, it's just piled higher and drier. Some of you farmers are here, aren't you? Maybe it has to do with money. Are we prejudiced against poor people? You know the ones out in front of Walmart? And they've got the little sign that says, anything will help. And some of them are really honest. It says, anything will help, buy me a beer. And in our minds, we're going, yeah, they're just going to buy drugs, and so I'm not going to give them anything. Or how about the people who live in those great big houses? You know, the mansions, the ones that are so huge. They must sell drugs to be able to live in a house like that. And we go on and on and on. It could be education, it could be social status, whatever it is. If somebody's different than we are, we're not comfortable. And so we're prejudiced. Or they're prejudiced against us. It goes both ways. I lived in a little town south of the border for 20 years. A little place called Mexico City. At the time that I lived there, there were 34 million people. It was growing 1.5 million a year. I mean, 34 million, that's more than 3 times the size of the population of Illinois. All in the valley where I lived. I had 4 little kids. When they were young, they were all blondes. 3 girls, 1 boy. And my kids were called güeritos. And in Spanish, that means little whiteys. Now, that signified 2 things. One, circumstances, it meant something very negative and something very polarizing. And my kids learned, so what? Jesus said, get over it. We are to be his witnesses to the people who like us, to the people who don't like us. And then Jesus says, you will be my witness to the world. Now that's where we normally think of the mission of the church. We're to go to the ends of the earth. Let me tell you, if you don't start here, you're not going to get there. Or if you do get there, it's with pennies. I was the 11th minister in 12 years at a church in St. Peters, Missouri. I said that correctly, 11th minister in 12 years. And when I went there, I knew that there was a problem in that church. I just wasn't sure what the problem was. And nobody else knew what the problem was either. And I stayed 8.5 years, and during the 8.5 years that I was there, the church took off and grew. Because I had been inspired, number one, by my major in missions in Bible college, and number two, by my vision for looking ahead and someday going to a mission field. When I went to that little church, they had 14 missions. Now, it was a church that they said they averaged 70, but that had to be the best Easter they'd ever seen. And we cut the missions in half. I know this is Mission Sunday. Don't get upset here. But we cut it in half because I asked people in the church, who is this that we're sending money to? They didn't know. It was $5 here, $20 there, $25 there. And we cut it in half and said we'll never send less than $100 a month to any of the 7 missions that we have left. And they said, we can't send that much. Do you know, the church took off and grew. And they were sending the $100 a month and never missed it to those 7. And those 7 became a part of the church. And the church began to feel like we exist around the world through these churches that we have a significant partnership with. When I was with Niños de Mexico, I was invited to a church in Dallas, Texas. It was called Valley View Christian Church. Denny Slaughter was the minister. I happened to be there when it was still about 350 people. And Denny had made the decision that at their church they would never give less than 20% of their income, total income, to missions. And they were going to go to 50%. Yeah, I heard someone go, you can't do that. Within 7 years, they were running 3,500 people, and they were sending millions of dollars a year around the world. And they were up to 42% of the entire budget going to world missions before Denny was no longer able to preach. Let me tell you, it can happen. We can have a real difference. When I was at that little church in St. Peters, Missouri, I remember one day I was at the pharmacy. Now, with 4 little kids, that's before we went to Mexico. With 4 little kids, you go to the pharmacy a lot. They should give you I was going to call it a recipe. That's what they call it in Spanish. Prescription, thank you. Somebody knew Spanish. It is a prescription. They ought to give you a prescription for 55-gallon drums of amoxicillin. I mean, at this time of year, every one of my kids, it just rotated through. And so Jim, the pharmacist, I knew him by name, he knew me by name. He looked at me one day and he goes, Terry, what's going on at your church? I said, I don't know. What is? Everyone else in town knows before the minister. He said, you've been there a whole year. I said, yeah. He said, my house is the one on the back corner of the property of your church. The other side of the parking lot over there. And he said, For the last 11 years since that church started, I would have my buddies over to sit on the deck and drink Budweiser whenever there was a sign out in front of the church that said congregational meeting. Oh, you have one next week, don't you? Yours is not like the 2 weeks. He said we would sit up there and bet. Was it the guy in the red shirt or the guy in the yellow shirt who would hit the ground first out in the parking lot? And I'm going, Jim, what in the world are you talking about? He said, well, they would come outside and fight. I thought, yeah, Jim, you're pulling my string. And so I went back to an elders meeting that week, and Tom Brooks was the chairman of the elders, and I looked at Tom and I said, Tom, what is this guy telling me? He's talking about these two guys fighting out in the parking lot, and Tom, the chairman of the elders, goes, I said, seriously? He said, yeah, Bill and Bob, and I'm changing the names to protect the guilty. Two of the deacons in the church, they would duke it out in the parking lot after almost every congregational meeting because they didn't like each other. And so if the church was talking about we're going to paint this wall lime green and somebody else said no, it's going to be cream. Well, one of them was on the lime green group and one of them was on the beige group, and they would go outside and fight. If they were going to put in a new nursery, and that was one of the things that they had just done, they would go outside and fight. The community knew it. Do you understand why they went through 11 ministers in 12 years? Do you understand why the church never grew? It was the fastest growing community in the St. Louis area, St. Peters, Missouri. They were completing 700 homes a week. And the church wasn't growing because of its witness. Jesus says, if you are my follower, you have no choice but to begin at home being my witness to your community, to your family. And then you go to the people who you're not comfortable with and who may not be comfortable with you. And finally you get to the uttermost parts of the world. And that's the strategic plan of the mission of Jesus Christ for His church. You're talking about faith promise mission today. Faith promises you're going to give to God what God blesses you with. You're going to stand in faith and you're going to say, yeah, this is what I'm going to give above and beyond this next year. Every church does it differently, but it really comes down to, are we going to be doing what God told us to do? I pray for you. We need strong churches who are beginning here and going there, who are sending people to be educated in the Bible, to be able to be missionaries and to be ministers. I know a couple of weeks ago, a couple of months ago now, you had our new worship team here. These were all freshmen except one. And they are mostly from Illinois. And their whole goal in life is to lead worship and to preach and to bring people to Jesus Christ. It has nothing to do with music, per se. It has everything to do with saving people's souls from hell. And this morning, as I close, I've finished with Acts 1:8. But you know, I just want to take a second and go to the 11th verse, if you'll let me. Jesus was very specific and very strategic. And he said, here is what I want you to do. And here is the way I want you to do it. And Jesus left. And what were his followers doing? Well, in the 11th verse, it says, two men dressed in white. Let me give you a hint. In the New Testament, men dressed in white are called angels. Two messengers from God walk up and go, hey, what in the world are you doing? And Peter's standing there looking up into the heavens, it says. And I can just imagine he's going, Andrew, I think he's behind the cloud that looks like the rabbit. And Andrew's going, no, it's the one that looks like the bunny ears. And Thomas is going, do you think he'll be back tonight? And the witnesses, these two angels, messengers of God, said, what did Jesus tell you to do? Well, we're supposed to go into Jerusalem. Why aren't you doing it? And they did it. And the rest is the history of the church. This morning, we are a part of the history of the church. We come together to worship, but we leave to minister. I hope you'll be about our Father's business this week. I'm going to pray right now for each of us. I don't know what your decision might be that you need to make. Maybe you just need to make the decision to surrender your life to Jesus, to do what he wants you to do. It could be Christian baptism. I don't know. The good thing about being a visitor is maybe Carl would like you to just say, yes, every week you need to be immersed. But he can't, because he'd be picking on you. Well, too bad. I don't know yet. And so if you need to be immersed, just do it. Maybe you're visiting and you've never actually become a member of this congregation. What other congregation in this area preaches the Word of God week after week after week? Place your membership. Whatever your decision is, make it today. Father, I pray for this congregation. I pray for this minister and his family.